COVID derangement syndrome, and I'm just so tired, and you're very tired as well of talking about COVID and lockdowns, aren't you?
Yeah, I just don't care. Like, I'm at the point where now if the government came out and said I'm going to shoot everyone who has it, I'd just be like, ugh. Because the British public's doing nothing. There is no opposition to this. There's no political opposition. There's no will. It's
no, there's
sad,
not.
But that's what it is.
There's literally nothing. And in all the sort of, public areas of the internet that I go to where this is discussed, it's one-sided narrative, where it's just like, we needed to lock down harder. It's like...
Yeah, all the reasonable conversations have been had.
Yeah, and they're gone. It seems that the public generally believes nonsense when it comes to COVID as well, which in fact we'll go through in a second. The UK recently reached 100,000 deaths within 28 days of a positive COVID test.
That's deaths for any reason within the 28-day period.
Yes, we do not, and again, this is not something that the general public have got any method of expressing, it seems. We are not sure. And in fact, we could probably be sure that these people are not all COVID deaths, as in deaths from COVID. They're deaths within 28 days of a positive test. Now, what was it, like 2 weeks you had to quarantine for?
I think it depends, but yeah.
Well, there have been various sort of standards, but back last summer, whenever it was, you were supposed to quarantine for 2 weeks, and then you would be out of the danger zone of, you'd have been out of it. So within 28 days means that literally someone could get tested on the first day, be fine 14 days later, and then on the 28th day get hit by a car and then be marked as a COVID death. So and the government...
This isn't to say that, we believe 80% of these are fake or something.
No.
No one actually has a good metric on this.
The NHS had previously revised down their figures. They sliced off like 5,000 figures because they said that their reporting methods were not accurate. And they're still just within 28 days. So we don't actually know how many COVID deaths there are. It's just these are the reported statistics that we have. And so we'll just go with that. Right. So we reached 100,000 people who had died within 28 days of a COVID test. And the media has been hamming this up like nothing I've ever seen before. A heart-wrenching, incomprehensible figure that many experts and scientists believe to be rooted in the failures of a reckless government that has overseen one of the largest avoidable losses of lives in generations. I hate it. Hate everything about it. Can't stand it. Like, the government is not responsible for COVID. They're not responsible for people dying of COVID. And they're not responsible for preventing people from getting COVID. I know that everyone's in the mindset was like, oh, well, the government should do this, the government should do that. It's not the government's job to prevent me getting a flu-like disease.
Plus, this is the point we had previously where they essentially put most of the country on what they call Tier 4, which is essentially lockdown. Yeah. And then people were like, no, we need a national lockdown. It's like, right, what's the difference?
Schools are still open. That was what the difference was.
The difference was they closed the schools, and then that was it.
Yeah.
Like,
because everything was already closed.
What more do you want them to do?
Yeah.
Like, there is nothing left to do.
And so moving into year 2 of the lockdowns, we've seen no improvement. I mean, there's a very small dip in the number of cases going up, but we're still, there are still thousands of people dying from within 28 days of a test positive for COVID. So what's the solution? Did it solve the problem? Is the third lockdown the solution? Seems not.
Just a preference. Just like saying solve the problem is kind of simplistic, and I don't like it because people say, did it solve? The goals were to lower the curve, but that's the thing. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, as Julie Hartley-Brewer points out, which is that, if it goes up and doesn't go over the top, then, that's proof that the lockdown's working. But if it does anyway, then that's proof that we didn't lock down hard enough.
Yeah.
There's no real way to argue against it.
But the fact we're in our third lockdown implies that lockdowns are not a miracle cure for COVID. They are tremendously damaging in every other respect, though. So what we have, I think, most generously, you could say, is a policy that has not been proven to work. That's just it. That's the only, but it appears to be the only tool that the UK government have. But more than a quarter of all UK deaths have been reported in the last month alone, which means that it's just getting worse, apparently. But yeah, the way the press are going on about this, they're really hyping this up. The reality is that such statistics barely scratch the surface of suffering that has paralysed the UK over the course of the crisis. Each life lost was a mother, a father, a child, a friend, a neighbour, a colleague, someone known and loved by another. Yeah, they were. Which is why locking them up alone was bad. Anyway, so Boris did a press conference yesterday in which he said very little apart from the very little new information, apart from the fact that the earliest they're considering opening up is March the 8th. And that's not even opening up. That's just schools in England can go back if it will not cause a, quote, surge in the disease. So nothing in any way guaranteed. It seems that for another month more, we're going to be locked up because our government is just tyrannical and doesn't know what else to do. The BBC put out what I would call a totally deranged report about the 100,000th death within 28 days of a positive test. And it was sort of morn porn. And it's been gross. It's like they want the public to be in a persistent state of sadness and paralysis. And one of the most interesting things about this was this clip that we'll play now that just really highlights why lockdowns are such an evil thing.
Ada Jackson was 90 and had early signs of dementia, but families say she was happy, strong and feisty until COVID came into the care home where she lived.
It started to go from one person to 3 people to 5 people. You then started to just think, my goodness, they're not going to be able to stop this. They had the residents locked in their room. I felt helpless, that solitary confinement in the room. I wonder if Ada felt abandoned at that point in time.
Ada died on June the 3rd. She hadn't seen her family since March.
These are human beings. These are people with families. They have lives. They're not just numbers. This is a life that's gone, and the impact is huge.
Since March. So that woman spent nearly a year on her own, eventually catches COVID and dies.
How old was she again?
90. Is that the way that you want to go out? Is that the way that any 90-year-old wants to go out? Alone, for months and months and months, locked in a room on their own, not able to see their family. Oh, because you might die. I mean, she's probably like 90 years old, It's not like I'm looking forward to skydiving next week or something. I'm not about to go climb Mount Everest. I'm not going to go on a world trip. When you're 90 years old, you don't have that much to look forward to apart from seeing your family. I mean, my nan died at 91 about a month and a half ago now. She didn't die from COVID. She died from cancer. Because old people die of lots of stuff, especially when they get into their 90s. It's a cruel reality. It's just what happens. But she couldn't see her great-grandkids. I couldn't see her until like a couple of days before she died. And she wasn't even conscious, And it's all because of these COVID restrictions. And yet she still died. It's not going to change anything. It's not going to prevent old people from dying. And at the moment, currently, it's ripping through old folks' homes. So even all of these lockdowns, all of this stuff, a quarter of the overall deaths in total have been in care homes alone. And that's just the elderly in these care homes. But obviously, it's mostly elderly people generally, but a quarter of them. So that's 25,000 old folks' homes have had people die in them from COVID. That's a quarter of the deaths. It's like,
even with all the lockdowns.
Even with all the precautions they're taking, right? Because it turns out we're actually not the masters of disease. Like, we actually don't have like magical powers that control the coronavirus and stuff like this. It's an infectious disease. People carry infectious diseases. Old people can catch infectious diseases, and therefore they end up dying. It's just a sad reality of life. I'm not happy about it. I don't relish it, but it's just what happens to very old people when they get very old. And so despite the damage we've done to ourselves, no one has been saved. No old people have been preserved. This is just something that's happened. And when asked about what's going on, I mean, there was a lady called Theresa Coffey, a Conservative MP for Suffolk Coastal, who went on Good Morning Britain the other day and was, interrogated by Piers Morgan. And she just basically had to come out and say, well, look, it's because we have a very old and obese population. It's not really a very nice way of putting it, and Piers, she had to kind of reprimand Piers for putting it in that way because it's not very polite, but it's the truth. As she says, is that generally the general public is older than many other countries and has a high level of obesity, and this is really just a consequence of people living longer and having lives full of unhealthy food. And the worst hit place, the BBC, I think it was it Sky News? We can go to the next one, John. Sky News did a report about the worst place hit in Britain, right? It's the Rhondda Valley, one of my ancestral homelands. In fact, my mum's family comes from the Rhondda Valley. It's half Welsh. And and it's the worst place hit in Britain. And so I just went and looked at some of the statistics about the place. Well, it turns out it's got one of the highest percentages of old people in Wales, presumably in the rest of the UK, in fact. The statistics don't look very good there, but basically they have a higher than usual number of old folks in Rhondda than they do in other places. Like Cardiff has roughly the same number of old folks, but has a much higher percentage of younger people, for example, because it's a big city. But the Rhondda Valleys are just full of small towns, where it's just old folks living the last years of their lives. And also the population there is not very healthy. It's in fact the least healthy place in Wales. If we can get the image up. I've circled the Rhondda Valley in red. And the lighter colours on this graph, this is from just Welsh Government, NHS Wales Population Health Observatory. And so I just took this out of the thing because this shows you a summary score of the physical health. And as they say there, a higher score means a better health, and the higher scores are in the darker blue. Well, you can see that the Rhondda is very light blue because it's a place where people are not very healthy, presumably because on average they are older than usual. And so it's like, right, okay, what can you do? What can be done? The way that the media and the sort of activists are acting is that this is Johnson's fault. And Johnson came out and took full responsibility for this. Like, he's not responsible for the people in the Rhondda Valley being old and unhealthy. He's not responsible for that, right? And it's not a judgment. It's just life. It's just what happens. He's not responsible for COVID getting into the old folks' homes and killing old people. He's not responsible for any of this. This is not his fault. There's nothing he could have done. I mean, what else could he have done? Like, what are the other options? Can you think of any? But we're still all under lockdown and it's still all going on. And the public, of course, are totally poorly informed. They don't know anything really about COVID. This was a poll that was done in November. And the public think the average age of COVID deaths is 65. And it was the UK's biggest killer. It's not, and it wasn't. The average age of death is 82.4 years. The average life expectancy is 81.1 years, according to the Office of National Statistics. So the average age of death for COVID has been, as far as I'm aware the entire time, over the age of life expectancy. So all of this is like, right, okay, old people are dying of a flu-like disease that we can't seem to stop, even if we shut down all of society, and it's just out of our power. It's out of our control. We're just not in control of this. I mean, there are 17,000 flu deaths a year. Obviously, all old people, mostly, right? Almost all old people. And this is just something that happens year by year by year. Some years it goes down to like 13,000. Some years it's as high as 28,000. But it averages about 17,000 flu deaths a year. We don't ruin all of society for this. We don't shut down because we can't stop this. And we know we can't stop this. And we should have taken this sort of attitude towards COVID, as rough as it is. Right? The World Health Organization doesn't advocate for lockdowns. Right? This is the thing. We are currently operating against the best wishes and the advice of the World Health Organization. As they say, under what is the WHO's position on lockdowns as a way of fighting COVID-19, large-scale physical distancing measures and movement restrictions, often referred to as lockdowns, can slow COVID-19 transmission by limiting contact between people. However, these measures have a profound negative impact on individuals, communities, and societies by bringing social and economic life to a near stop. Such measures disproportionately affect disadvantaged groups, including people in poverty, migrants, internally displaced people and refugees, or those who live in overcrowded and under-resourced settings, dependent on daily labour for subsistence. Oh yeah, I should have pointed out the Rhondda Valley isn't exactly, Sussex. It's not exactly a place that's swimming in wealth either. But anyway, carrying on. The WHO recognises that at certain points some countries have had no choice but to issue stay-at-home measures, and they should make the best of their lockdown time. But they hope that the countries will use targeted interventions when and where needed, based on the local situation. They do not advocate for lockdowns. As they say, they have a massive and profound negative impact. And back in August 2020, we actually knew what this sort of impact was, because a report had been given to the government that had suggested that, in fact, there was something like for every 3 COVID deaths, there were 2 deaths caused by the lockdowns. I was like, okay, that's awful, isn't it? Right? These are what's called excess deaths, and this is just like these are not people who otherwise would have died. These are people who have died as a consequence of the lockdowns, and this is continuing on. Again, we're going to hurry up because time's moving on. But the lockdowns, speaking to our own little sunny island of paradise in Swindon, the lockdowns are destroying this town. Absolutely destroying this town. This is a large town, right? But like, here's River Island is yet another high street store that's closing because they can't afford to stay in the high street now because no one's allowed to go and buy their stuff. But it wasn't just them. John Lewis, Debenhams, the Oasis, which is a swimming pool complex, all of these have been shut down. Like, the Swindon High Street is just totally just bereft of any value now, right? And then you've got like the weird sort of mental mindset that the Conservatives must be in at this point, right? Boris looks like he's a man that's been destroyed by this. Giving his little COVID briefing yesterday, I mean, there's a part of me that kind of feels bad for him, right? Because I don't think that he's naturally inclined to want to tyrannize people. I don't actually think that he's that kind of guy. But I think that they're just in a position where they think they have to act as if they're in control of everything, and any failure on their part is a reflection of them personally, rather than a reflection of them trying to do something they just can't do. But anyway, so apparently the Conservatives were floating the idea of using children to spy on their parents if the parents break lockdown, and getting the children to report to the government that their parents have broken lockdown. Orwellian. Actually something from 1984. It's actually evil. Ian Duncan Smith, of all people, had to come out and be like, no, this is terrible. And it's looking like there's going to be a Conservative backbench rebellion over this. Thank God. I mean, why you're even discussing it. Everyone I've spoken to says David Davis has been horrified when it's been explained to them. It will allow 16 and 17-year-olds to spy on their parents and authorises them to commit crimes as well. So it needs to be extremely tightly controlled, and those controls need to be tied to what the government is proposing. No, you shouldn't be thinking about this. The idea that you should get children to spy on their parents is insane. And then you've got the next thing, which is like, there's a school in Oldham, Yew Tree Community School in Oldham, that wants to punish children who've been visiting other people outside their households, breaking the lockdown. And they want to eject these children from their online learning at school. It's like, my God, what an evil thing to do that would be. As if it's the children's choice that they go out and see other people, right? But what an evil thing that would be. And it's because the parents are putting the staff in danger. Not true. Absolutely not true. Again, at yesterday's press conference, one of Boris's scientific advisors laid out, look, the teachers are not in any particular danger of COVID because the teachers are way below retirement age. The children can spread COVID. It's not clear that the teachers catch COVID from the kids, although let's be fair, they probably do. But it's not clear that there's any particular connections here. And it's also no particular danger for the teachers. This is the government position as laid out yesterday. This is bullshit. Sorry, I shouldn't swear. You know, we do try not to swear, and this is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense, and it's probably connected to Labour domination of the unions, but I'm not even going to go into that, right? Let's just make Jess Phillips' argument for how keeping kids out of school is actually unfair and unkind. I completely agree with you, Jess Phillips. It is indeed, as you pointed out in July 2019, totally unfair if kids can't go to school. Hundreds of children and parents marched from Westminster to object to the early closing of schools on Fridays. They waved placards that said, "We're the future, don't cut us short. Make the future bright, stop being so tight." Totally agree. At the time, I probably, in fact, I didn't necessarily disagree, but I did say, well, look, is it the government's job to make sure your kids are in school? Well, I mean, it's the government's job to make sure that you're not prevented from going to school, at the very least. But, yeah. The reality is this is affecting people all across the country. It's no surprise to me that all parents want their kids in school for 5 days a week, for their own livelihoods and for the future of their children. Well, as a parent, Jess, I totally agree with you. I want my kids in school for their futures, for my wife's mental health. You know, she's trapped all day, every day with the kids, and it's bad for them and their education. But yeah, unfair and unkind. Well, I won't even bother going through the rest of it because we're running out of time. So let's just... Have we got time to do super chats?
Yeah.
Right, okay. But, so yeah, basically, like,
I don't know what's going on with the super chats.
There's nothing legitimate about these lockdowns. They didn't work. I hate it. I know you don't care, but man, I'm so angry about this whole thing.
Oh, it's not that I don't care. It's just
you
apathy.
resigned. Yeah, you resigned.
Yeah, resigned to this is nonsense and is what it is.